The piano music drifted through the smoke-filled air of the Silver Spur Saloon, and Willa Preston felt her feet aching as she forced another smile at the drunk miner who kept stepping on her toes. It was 1878 in Pinon, New Mexico territory, and she had been dancing in this establishment for 3 years, each night blending into the next like watercolors in the rain. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, her dreams of escaping to San Francisco growing dimmer with each coin dropped into her palm. The miner finally stumbled away, and Willa retreated to the bar where Martha, the other Dancehall girl, was already nursing a glass of lukewarm water. The July heat made everything worse, the smell of unwashed bodies and spilled whiskey combining into something that made Willa's stomach turn even after all this time. "You look like you are about to collapse," Martha said, her voice low enough that only Willa could hear over the raucous laughter and terrible singing coming from the poker table in the corner. "I am fine," Willa lied, adjusting the crimson dress that she had mended so many times the fabric was starting to thin at the seams. "Just tired." "We are all tired, honey. That is the job." Willa did not respond because there was nothing to say. She had come to Pinon with her father when she was 19, full of hope that they would strike it rich in the silver mines. Instead, her father had died in a cave, and 6 months later, leaving her with nothing but his debts and a trunk of her mother's old dresses. The Silver Spur had been the only place willing to hire a desperate girl with no family and no prospects. She scanned the crowded room, her practiced gaze cataloging the usual suspects. There were the miners, freshly paid and eager to spend their wages on drink and company. There were the gamblers, hunched over their cards with the intensity of men who had nothing left to lose. And then there were the cowboys, quieter than the rest, usually just passing through on their way to somewhere more interesting. That was when she noticed him. He sat alone at a corner table, nursing a single glass of whiskey that looked like it had not been touched in quite some time. He was tall, she could tell even though he was sitting down, with broad shoulders and hands that were calloused and scarred from hard work. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing dark hair and a face that was weathered but not unkind. He looked to be around 27 or 28, with the sort of quiet presence that made him easy to overlook in a room full of louder, more demanding men. But Willa noticed him because he was looking at her, not in the way the miners looked at her, with hungry eyes and grasping hands, not even in the way some of the younger cowboys looked at her, with a mixture of longing and embarrassment. He was just watching, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes following her movements with an attention that made her feel suddenly self-conscious. "Who is that?" she asked Martha, nodding slightly in his direction. Martha glanced over and shrugged. "Never seen him before." "Probably just another drifter." The piano player launched into a new song, something fast and discordant that made Willa's head ache. She was required to dance with anyone who paid, and she could see the saloon owner, a greasy man named Frank Dutton, gesturing at her to get back to work. She plastered on her professional smile and moved back into the crowd, allowing a cattle buyer to swing her around the floor while he breathed whiskey fumes into her face and talked endlessly about the price of beef. When the song finally ended, she extracted herself as gracefully as she could and found herself near the quiet cowboy's table. Up close, she could see that his clothes were worn but clean, his boots scuffed but well maintained. There was a carefulness to him, a deliberateness in the way he held himself that spoke of someone who thought before he acted. "Would you like to dance?" The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them, which was unusual. Normally, she waited for the men to approach her, but something about him made her bold. He looked up, and she saw that his eyes were a deep brown, almost black in the dim lamplight. For a moment she thought he was going to refuse, and she felt a strange twist of disappointment in her chest. "I am not much of a dancer," he said finally, his voice low and rough like he did not use it often. "Neither are most of the men here," Willa replied, surprising herself with her honesty. "But they pay anyway." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "How much?" $1 for 3 songs. He considered this, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver coin. He placed it on the table and stood, and Willa realized she had been right about his height. He towered over her, but there was nothing threatening about him. He offered his hand, and she took it. The piano player had switched to something slower, thank God, and Willa found herself in the strange position of actually enjoying a dance. The cowboy was not lying when he said he was not much of a dancer, but he was steady and careful, guiding her around the floor without stepping on her feet or trying to pull her closer than was proper. "What is your name?" she asked after they had completed one full circle around the room. He hesitated, as if even this small piece of information was something valuable. Quincy Xander. "I am Willa Preston." He nodded, and they danced in silence for a while. It should have been awkward, but somehow it was not. There was something peaceful about him, something that made Willa feel like she could breathe for the first time all night. "You do not seem like you belong here," Quincy said suddenly, just as the second song was winding down. Willa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Where do I seem like I belong?" "Somewhere better than this." It was such a simple statement, delivered without flirtation or false flattery, that Willa felt something crack open inside her chest. She had to look away, blinking hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. "Well, we do not always get what we deserve," she managed, her voice rougher than she intended. The third song ended, and Quincy released her immediately, stepping back with the same careful deliberateness he seemed to apply to everything. Willa expected him to walk away, to disappear into the crowd like all the others, but instead he returned to his table and sat down, his eyes finding her again across the room. The night continued in its usual chaos. Willa danced with miners and cowboys and gamblers, her feet moving automatically while her mind wandered. She kept finding herself looking back at Quincy's table, and every time she did, he was still there, still watching. Finally, near midnight, Frank Dutton rang the bell that signaled last call. The crowd began to thin, the drunkest men being herded out by the bartender while others stumbled toward the door on their own. Willa's whole body ached with exhaustion, and she wanted nothing more than to collapse into her narrow bed in the boarding house down the street. She was collecting her shawl when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Quincy standing there, his hat in his hands. "Miss Preston," he said, formal in a way that made him seem out of place in the tawdry surroundings of the Silver Spur. "I was wondering if I might speak with you. If you have the time." Willa glanced at Frank, who was counting the night's receipts and paying no attention to her. Martha had already left with one of her regular customers. The late hour should have made her cautious, but there was something about Quincy that made her feel safe rather than threatened. "I suppose so," she said, "though I cannot imagine what you would want to talk about." "It is a proposition," Quincy said. "A business proposition, if you would be willing to hear it." Now Willa was truly curious. She nodded toward one of the empty tables, and they sat down across from each other. In the relative quiet, with most of the noise and chaos gone, the Silver Spur looked even more depressing than usual. The walls were stained with smoke and age, the floorboards sticky with spilled alcohol. Willa hated it with a passion that sometimes surprised her with its intensity. "I have a ranch," Quincy began, his rough voice careful and measured, "about 15 miles north of here, up in the foothills." "It is not much," Just a small operation with cattle and some horses, but it is mine. Paid for in full. Willa waited, unsure where this was going. The thing is, Quincy continued, looking down at his hands, it is hard to run a place like that alone. I have been managing, but barely. The house needs work, and I do not have time to do all the cooking and cleaning and still take care of the animals and mend the fences and do everything else that needs doing. You need a housekeeper, Willa said, understanding dawning. More than that, Quincy said, finally meeting her eyes. I need a partner, someone who would be willing to share the work and the profits, someone who wants to build something instead of just surviving day to day. Why me? Willa asked bluntly. You do not know anything about me. I know you hate it here, Quincy said. I can see it in your eyes every time you smile at those men. I know you are smart, because you would have to be to survive this long in a place like this. And I know you are strong, because this kind of work would break anyone who was not. Willa's heart was pounding. What exactly are you proposing? Come work at the ranch. I will pay you fair wages and you will have your own room. No expectations beyond the work itself. If it does not suit you, you can leave any time you want. But I think you want out of here as badly as I need help, and maybe we can help each other. It was insane. She did not know this man at all. He could be dangerous, could be lying about everything, could be planning God knows what. But Willa found herself considering it anyway, because the alternative was staying here, dancing with drunk minors and slowly dying inside. I have heard things about women who go off alone with men they do not know, she said carefully. It rarely ends well for them. That is fair, Quincy acknowledged. I can give you references if you want them. The general store owner here knows me and the banker. I have been coming to Pinyon for supplies for the past 5 years. Ask anyone who I am and whether I am trustworthy. Why not just hire someone from town? Why come to a saloon? Quincy was quiet for a long moment. Because everyone in town already has their place, their family, their connections. I needed someone who might want a fresh start as much as I need help. And when I saw you tonight, I thought maybe you were that person. Willa studied his face, trying to see past the weathered exterior to whatever lay beneath. He did not look away, letting her examine him with a patience that spoke of someone who had nothing to hide. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Quincy stood, settling his hat back on his head. I am staying at the boarding house, the one on 2nd Street. I will be in town for another 2 days buying supplies. If you decide you are interested, you can find me there. He left without another word, and Willa sat alone in the empty saloon, her mind racing. Frank was still in his office, and she could hear him muttering to himself as he worked through his ledgers. Outside, Pinyon was settling into its restless nighttime quiet, the sound of distant music and laughter drifting from other establishments that never truly closed. Willa gathered her shawl and walked out into the warm night air. The boarding house where she lived was only a few blocks away, and she made the walk automatically, her feet knowing the path even while her thoughts were elsewhere. Her room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was hers. She had made it as comfortable as she could with the few possessions she owned. A faded quilt her mother had made, a small mirror with a cracked frame, a wooden box that held the last letters her father had written to his sister back in Illinois. She lay awake for hours, watching the shadows move across the ceiling as people passed by in the street below. The offer was tempting, dangerously so. The idea of leaving the Silver Spur, of never having to paste on that false smile again, or let strange men put their hands on her waist, was almost intoxicating. But the risk was enormous. She would be completely isolated on a ranch miles from town, dependent on a man she had only just met. If Quincy turned out to be other than what he seemed, She would have no recourse, no one to help her. The next morning, Willa did something she had never done before. She told Frank she was feeling ill and could not work that evening. He was furious, threatening to dock her pay and replace her with one of the girls who was always hanging around looking for work, but Willa held firm. She needed time to investigate Quincy's claims before making any decisions. Her first stop was the general store, a cluttered establishment run by an elderly man named Mr. Shepherd, who seemed to know everything about everyone in Pinyon. He looked up when she entered, his rheumy eyes brightening with curiosity. "Miss Preston," he greeted her. "Do not usually see you during the day. What can I do for you?" "I was hoping you could give me some information," Willa said, trying to sound casual. "About a man named Quincy Xander. He says he has a ranch north of town." Mr. Shepherd's face cleared with recognition. "Oh, sure, I know Quincy. Good man, quiet fellow. Comes in about once a month for supplies, always pays in cash, never causes any trouble. Had that ranch for about 5 years now, inherited it from his uncle who passed. Heard he has been trying to build it up, but it is hard work for one person." "Do you know anything else about him? His character, I mean." The old man gave her a shrewd look. "He is making you an offer, is he? Heard he was looking for help. Well, I can tell you this much. In all the years I have known him, Quincy Xander has never given me reason to doubt his word. He is honest, hardworking, and keeps to himself. If he said he would do something, he does it. That is about the best recommendation I can give any man." Willa thanked him and left, her next stop the small bank that served the town. The banker, a nervous man named Mr. Harris, was less forthcoming until Willa explained that she was considering a business arrangement and needed to verify some facts. Even then, he would only confirm that Quincy maintained an account in good standing and had no outstanding debts. It was not much, but it was something. Willa spent the rest of the day walking around Pinyon, trying to imagine what her life would be like if she stayed versus if she left. The town felt smaller than usual, the heat oppressive, the familiar sights suddenly stifling. She found herself at the edge of town, looking north toward the foothills where Quincy's ranch supposedly lay. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the afternoon light, mysterious and somehow inviting. That evening, Willa returned to the Silver Spur with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She had not made a decision yet, but she was leaning toward accepting Quincy's offer. The night passed in its usual blur of music and dancing and forced cheerfulness, but Willa's heart was not in it. She kept thinking about clean air and open spaces, about work that might actually mean something instead of this endless cycle of emptiness. When her shift ended, she found Martha outside having a cigarette. The other woman looked worn out, her makeup streaked and her dress rumpled. "I might be leaving," Willa said without preamble. Martha raised an eyebrow. "Leaving the Silver Spur or leaving Pinyon?" "Both, maybe." "Does this have anything to do with that tall cowboy from last night?" Willa nodded and Martha sighed, dropping her cigarette and grinding it under her heel. "Be careful, Willa. Men make all kinds of promises when they want something." "I know. But I cannot keep doing this, Martha. I cannot keep living like this." "None of us can, honey, but we do anyway, because that is what women like us have to do." Willa left Martha standing there and walked to the boarding house on 2nd Street. It was late, nearly 2 in the morning, but she knew she would not be able to sleep until she made a decision. The boarding house was dark and quiet, and she hesitated at the front door, wondering if she had lost her mind. Before she could change her mind, she knocked firmly. It took several minutes, but eventually the landlady, a sour-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, opened the door in her nightgown and cap. "This better be important," Mrs. Chen grumbled. "I need to speak with Quincy Xander. Is he staying here?" Mrs. Chen's expression shifted to something calculating. "He is in room 4 upstairs, but it is the middle of the night. I know, it is important." The landlady let her in with obvious reluctance, watching as Willa climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. She found room 4 and knocked quietly, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this all was. If anyone found out she was visiting a man's room at this hour, her reputation would be completely destroyed. Then again, her reputation was already pretty much ruined by virtue of working at the Silver Spur, so perhaps it did not matter. The door opened and Quincy stood there in his shirt sleeves, his hair tousled like he had been lying down but not sleeping. He looked surprised to see her but not displeased. "Miss Preston," he said, "is everything all right?" "I want to accept your offer," Willa said quickly before she could lose her nerve. "I want to come work at your ranch." Quincy stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in for a moment. We should discuss the details." Willa entered the small room, which was as sparse and neat as she had expected. Quincy left the door open, a gesture she appreciated, and pulled out the room's single chair for her while he sat on the edge of the bed. "I am glad," he said simply. "I think this will be good for both of us." "I need to understand exactly what you are expecting," Willa said. "What the arrangement would be." "Fair enough." Quincy leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The ranch is about 300 acres, most of it grazing land. I have about 50 head of cattle right now and 6 horses. The house is small, just 3 rooms, a main room that serves as kitchen and living area and 2 bedrooms. You would have one of the bedrooms and I would take the other. There is a well for water and a root cellar for storage. What would my responsibilities be?" "Cooking, cleaning, tending the kitchen garden if you are willing, maybe helping with the chickens. Beyond that, whatever you feel comfortable with. I would not expect you to do heavy ranch work, but if you wanted to learn about the animals or help with other tasks, I would welcome it." "And the wages?" $30 a month plus room and board. That is more than you are making at the saloon, I would wager." It was considerably more. Willa had been making about $15 a month at the Silver Spur, and she had to pay for her own room and food out of that. "What about when you need to come to town for supplies?" Willa asked. "Would I come with you or stay at the ranch? That would be your choice, whatever you prefer. And if I want to leave, I can do so at any time." "Any time," Quincy confirmed. "Though I would appreciate notice if possible so I can make other arrangements." Willa took a deep breath. "All right. When would you want me to start?" "I am planning to head back the day after tomorrow. Would that give you enough time to settle your affairs here?" "More than enough." "I do not have many affairs to settle." Quincy stood and offered his hand. "Then we have an agreement." Willa shook his hand, feeling the rough calluses against her palm, and tried to ignore the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She was really doing this. She was leaving Pinyon, leaving the Silver Spur, leaving everything she knew for an uncertain future with a man she had just met. The next day was a blur of activity. Willa told Frank she was leaving, which resulted in a screaming match that ended with him throwing her last wages at her and telling her she would be back within a month, begging for her job. She packed her few possessions into the same trunk her father had brought to Pinyon 3 years ago, said goodbye to Martha, who cried and made her promise to send word if she needed help, and tried not to think too hard about what she was doing. When Quincy came to collect her the following morning with a wagon and team, Willa was ready. She wore her most practical dress, a plain brown calico that she had always hated because it made her look washed out, and a bonnet to protect her face from the sun. Her trunk was loaded into the wagon bed, and then Quincy was helping her up onto the seat beside him, his hand steady and impersonal. They left Pinyon just as the sun was rising, turning the dusty streets golden and making everything look almost beautiful. Willa did not look back. The journey to the ranch took most of the day. The road was rough and poorly maintained, winding up into the foothills through scrub brush and juniper trees. Quincy was not much of a conversationalist, but Willa found she did not mind the silence. It was peaceful, just the sound of the wagon wheels and the horses' hooves and the occasional call of a bird. They stopped once at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of bread and dried beef that Quincy had brought. Willa sat on a rock and looked out at the landscape stretching in all directions, vast and empty and somehow full of possibility. The air smelled different here, cleaner, with a hint of pine and sage. "It is beautiful," she said, surprising herself. Quincy followed her gaze, his expression softening slightly. "It is. That is why I stayed, even when things got hard. Could not imagine living anywhere else." "Where are you from originally?" "Colorado, up near Denver." "My uncle moved out here after the war, said he wanted to get as far from civilization as possible. When he died, he left me the ranch. I had been working in the mines back in Colorado, and I figured anything had to be better than that." "What about your parents?" Quincy's expression closed down. "Dead. Fever took them when I was 16, raised myself after that mostly." "I am sorry," Willa said, meaning it. "My mother died when I was young too, consumption, and my father died in a mining accident 3 years ago." "I am sorry too," Quincy said, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, united by their shared losses. They reached the ranch in late afternoon, and Willa's first impression was that it was smaller than she had expected. The house was indeed tiny, a rough wooden structure that looked like it had been built in stages, with new sections added on as needed. There was a barn, a chicken coop, and several corrals. Everything was well-maintained but basic, the home of someone who had more important things to worry about than aesthetics. Quincy helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk into the house. The interior was dim and cool, the main room dominated by a large stone fireplace and a rough wooden table with chairs. The kitchen area was in one corner, with a cast iron stove and open shelving for dishes and supplies. 2 doors led to what must be the bedrooms. "This one is yours," Quincy said, opening the door on the right. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. Someone, presumably Quincy, had made an effort to make it welcoming. There were fresh sheets on the bed and wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. "It is perfect," Willa said, and meant it. It was more privacy than she had had in 3 years. "I will let you settle in," Quincy said, setting her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "There is water in the pitcher on the dresser if you want to wash up. I need to go check on the animals, but I will be back in an hour or so. We can have supper then." He left, and Willa sank down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. The mattress was stuffed with something soft, maybe straw or corn husks, and the sheets smelled like they had been dried in the sun. She lay back for just a moment, looking up at the rough wooden ceiling, and felt something unknot in her chest. For the first time in 3 years, she felt safe. True to his word, Quincy returned about an hour later, and Willa emerged from her room to find him lighting lamps and stoking the fire in the stove. "I was thinking we could keep it simple tonight," he said. "Just beans and cornbread. Tomorrow you can take stock of the pantry and plan meals however you like." "I can cook tonight," Willa offered. "That is what you are paying me for, after all. You have had a long day. Let me handle it this once." They worked together in companionable silence, and Willa was surprised to find that Quincy was competent in the kitchen. Moving with the same careful efficiency he seemed to apply to everything. The meal was simple but good, and they ate at the wooden table as the last light faded from the sky. "What is the routine here?" Willa asked. "What time do you wake up? When do you need meals? That sort of thing." "I am usually up before dawn," Quincy said. "I take care of the animals first thing, which takes about 2 hours. Breakfast any time after that would be good, nothing fancy. Midday dinner around noon, and supper whenever you have it ready in the evening. I am not particular. And what will I do with myself when I am not cooking? Whatever you like. There is mending that needs doing, and the garden could use attention. The chicken coop needs cleaning. But if you want time to yourself to read or rest or whatever, that is fine too. I am not a taskmaster, Willa. I just need help keeping this place running." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about it made her feel more settled. This might actually work, she thought. This strange arrangement with this quiet man might actually turn into something bearable. The days fell into a rhythm. Willa woke each morning to find Quincy already gone, out tending the cattle or mending fences, or doing whatever mysterious tasks filled his days. She would make breakfast, usually something simple like eggs and bacon or pancakes, and he would come in to eat before heading back out. Then she would clean up, tend to the chickens, work in the garden, and start preparing the midday meal. Afternoons were for mending or baking or any of the 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. Evenings they would eat supper together, exchange a few words about their days, and then retire to their separate rooms. It should have been boring, this quiet existence, but Willa found herself settling into it with a relief that surprised her. After 3 years of noise and chaos and unwanted attention, the peace of the ranch was like a balm to her raw nerves. She liked the simple routine, the way each day had a clear purpose and structure. She liked not having to smile when she did not feel like it, not having to pretend to enjoy herself while strange men pawed at her. Quincy was an easy man to live with. He was neat, considerate, and asked for very little beyond what they had agreed upon. He spoke when he had something to say and was silent the rest of the time, which Willa appreciated. After years of meaningless chatter at the saloon, she found his quietness restful. But as the weeks passed, Willa became aware of something shifting between them. It was nothing overt, nothing she could point to and name, but there was a growing comfort in their interactions, a sense of partnership developing. Quincy started asking her opinion on things, like whether to sell some cattle or where to plant a new section of fence. Willa found herself taking on more tasks around the ranch, helping with the horses when Quincy needed an extra set of hands, learning to milk the cow they kept for dairy. One evening in early September, about 6 weeks after Willa had arrived at the ranch, they were sitting outside after supper watching the sun set over the mountains. It had become a habit, these quiet evenings on the porch, and Willa looked forward to them more than she wanted to admit. "You were right," she said suddenly. "About me not belonging at the Silver Spur. I hated it there, hated every minute of it." Quincy looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "But you stayed for 3 years. That takes strength, or stupidity. I am not sure which." "Strength," Quincy said firmly. "You did what you had to do to survive. That is nothing to be ashamed of." Willa felt something warm bloom in her chest. It was the first time anyone had said something like that to her, the first time someone had acknowledged that her work at the saloon had been a necessity rather than a choice. "Why did you really come to the Silver Spur that night?" she asked. "Why were you looking for someone like me?" Quincy was quiet for a long time, and Willa thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I have been alone for a long time. 5 years on this ranch, just me and the animals. It was wearing on me, the silence and the isolation. I went to town thinking I might find someone to hire, but I did not know how to go about it. And then I walked into the saloon and saw you, and I just knew." "Knew what?" "That you were someone who would understand." Someone who would not judge me for wanting a simple life out here away from everything. Someone who might be willing to take a chance on something uncertain. That is a lot to assume from one glance. Maybe, but I was right, was I not? Willa laughed softly. I suppose you were. The moment felt charged somehow, weighted with things unsaid. Willa found herself very aware of Quincy beside her, of the way the fading light caught in his dark hair, of the quiet strength in his posture. She had been carefully not thinking about him as a man, as anything other than an employer, but suddenly it was impossible to ignore. As if sensing her thoughts, Quincy stood abruptly. I should check on the horses before it gets full dark. Good night, Willa. Good night, she replied, and watched him walk away toward the barn, his silhouette dark against the purple sky. That night, Willa lay in bed and let herself think about Quincy in a way she had been avoiding. She thought about his kindness, his quiet competence, the way he treated her with respect and consideration. She thought about how safe she felt here, how the tension she had carried for 3 years was slowly dissolving. And she thought about how, when he smiled, which was rare but genuine, it made her want to do foolish things like touch his face or take his hand. It was dangerous, these feelings. She was here to work, nothing more. The last thing she needed was to complicate this arrangement with emotions that might not be returned. She had seen what happened to women who let their hearts rule their heads, had seen it 100 times at the Silver Spur. It never ended well. But despite her best efforts to remain practical, Willa found herself drawn to Quincy more with each passing day. She started noticing small things, like how he always made sure to compliment her cooking, or how he had fixed the loose step on the porch without being asked, because he knew she used it frequently. She noticed the way his hands moved when he was working, strong and capable, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when something amused him. It was October when things changed. The weather had turned cooler, with crisp mornings that required a shawl and evenings that demanded a fire in the hearth. Willa had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months, and it felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since her childhood in Illinois. She was in the kitchen garden one afternoon, harvesting the last of the squash before the frost could get it, when she heard unfamiliar voices. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 men on horseback approaching the house. They looked rough, with trail dust coating their clothes and hard expressions on their faces. Quincy emerged from the barn, and Willa saw him tense when he saw the riders. He walked toward them slowly, and Willa quietly moved closer to the house, trying to hear what was being said. "Help you gentlemen?" Quincy asked, his voice neutral. "Maybe," one of the men replied. He was older than the others, with graying hair and a scar across his cheek. "We are looking for some cattle that went missing from the Parker Ranch over east. Heard there might be some strays in this area." "Have not seen any strays," Quincy said, "but you are welcome to look around if you need to." "That is mighty generous of you," the man said, but there was something nasty in his tone. Mighty generous for someone living out here all alone with just a saloon girl for company. Willa felt her face flush with anger and shame. So word had gotten around about where Quincy had found her. She should have expected that in a small community like this, news traveled fast. "Miss Preston works for me as my housekeeper," Quincy said, and there was an edge to his voice now that Willa had never heard before. "And I would appreciate it if you would speak of her with respect." The scarred man smirked. "Housekeeper, that what they are calling it these days?" Quincy moved fast, faster than Willa would have thought possible. He grabbed the man's bridle, his face hard. "I said speak of her with respect, or you can get off my land right now." The tension was thick enough to cut, and Willa held her breath, terrified that the situation was going to turn violent. But after a long moment, the scarred man backed down, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We will be on our way." The three men rode off, and Quincy stood watching them until they were out of sight. Then he turned and saw Willa standing by the house. Something in his expression softened, and he walked over to her. "You all right?" he asked. "I am fine, but thank you for defending me." "He had no right to speak to you that way," Quincy said fiercely. "No right at all. People are going to talk, Quincy. You had to know that when you brought me here." "Let them talk. I do not care what anyone thinks." But Willa cared because she knew how damaging rumors could be. She also knew that Quincy's reputation could be hurt by association with her, and the thought made her sick with guilt. That evening, over supper, Willa brought it up again. "Those men today, they are not going to be the last ones to make assumptions about us." "Probably not," Quincy agreed. "Does that bother you?" "It bothers me that it might hurt you. Your reputation, your standing in the community." Quincy set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Willa, I do not have much standing in the community to begin with. I keep to myself, always have. The only people whose opinions I care about are the ones who know me well enough to judge fairly. Everyone else can think what they like." "You are being naive," Willa said, more sharply than she intended. "In a place like this, reputation is everything. If people think I am here as something other than your housekeeper, it could cause you real problems. Then maybe we should give them something else to think about." Willa stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Quincy stood up and started pacing, which was so unlike him that Willa felt a flutter of anxiety. When he finally spoke, the words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back for a long time. "I am saying that maybe this arrangement should be more than just an employment situation. Maybe we should make it real, make it official. Quincy, I do not understand what you are suggesting." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "I am suggesting marriage, Willa. I am suggesting that maybe what started as a business arrangement could become something more." Willa felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "You want to marry me? I know it is sudden. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have come to care about you, Willa. I enjoy your company, I respect you. And I think maybe you feel something for me too, or am I reading that wrong?" He was not reading it wrong, and they both knew it. But Willa was terrified to admit it, terrified of what it would mean. "Quincy, you do not have to marry me just to protect my reputation." "That is not why I am asking," Quincy said, coming to kneel beside her chair. "I am asking because I wake up every morning glad that you are here. I am asking because I find myself looking forward to our evenings together more than anything else in my day. I am asking because somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my life, and I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before." Willa felt tears spring to her eyes. "I worked in a saloon. People danced with me, touched me. That is not the kind of woman men like you marry." "You are exactly the kind of woman I would marry," Quincy said fiercely. "You are strong and brave and kind. You work hard and you do not complain. You make this place feel like a home instead of just a house. I do not care about your past, Willa. I care about you right now as you are." "I do not know what to say," Willa whispered. "Say you will think about it. That is all I am asking." Willa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Quincy stood, squeezed her shoulder gently, and left her alone with her tumbling thoughts. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she lay awake thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. 3 months ago, she had been desperate and hopeless, trapped in a life that was slowly killing her spirit. Now she had a home, work that felt meaningful, and a man who was offering her something she had never thought she would have. A real future. But it was terrifying too. Marriage was permanent, binding. If she accepted Quincy's proposal, she would be tying her fate to his completely. And while she cared about him, maybe even loved him if she was honest with herself, the speed of it all made her head spin. By morning, she still had not reached a decision. She made breakfast mechanically, and when Quincy came in from the barn, they ate in strained silence. He did not press her, did not even mention the conversation from the night before, and she was grateful for his patience. The day passed slowly. Willa went through her usual tasks, but her mind was elsewhere, running through every possible outcome of either decision. If she said no, could they continue as they were? Or would things be too awkward now? If she said yes, would she be making a terrible mistake? Or would she be seizing the chance at happiness that she had been seeking all along? It was evening when she finally found Quincy in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. He looked up when she entered, and she could see the anxiety in his eyes, carefully masked but present nonetheless. "I have an answer," Willa said without preamble. "But first I need to know something. Do you love me, Quincy? Not just care about me or respect me, but actually love me?" He set down the brush and came to stand in front of her. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you, Willa. I think I started falling in love with you that first night at the saloon, when I saw how you kept smiling even though I could tell you wanted to cry. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you hum when you are cooking and do not realize it. I love that you are not afraid of hard work and that you treat the animals with kindness. I love you completely and honestly." Willa felt the tears spill over then, running down her cheeks. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do. I love you so much it scares me." Quincy reached out and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Does that mean yes?" "Yes," Willa said, and then she was in his arms, being held so carefully, so tenderly, that she thought her heart might burst. "Yes, I will marry you." Quincy pulled back just enough to look at her face, and then he was kissing her, soft and sweet and perfect. It was Willa's first real kiss, the fumbling attempts from boys back in Illinois not counting, and it made her feel like she was flying and falling at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this," he promised. "I know you will," Willa replied and meant it. They were married 3 weeks later in Pinyon, in a simple ceremony at the small church with only a handful of witnesses. Willa wore a new dress that Quincy had insisted on buying her, a beautiful blue calico with lace at the collar that made her feel like a different person. She had invited Martha, who cried through the entire ceremony and hugged Willa so hard afterward that she could barely breathe. The general store owner, Mr. Shepard, stood as one of Quincy's witnesses, along with the ranch hand from a neighboring property who seemed genuinely happy for them. There were some stares and whispers from other townspeople, but Willa found she did not care. She was marrying a good man who loved her, and the rest was just noise. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Willa felt a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The marriage had to be consummated to be legal, and while she trusted Quincy completely, she was still anxious about the physical intimacy that would now be expected. Quincy seemed to sense her nervousness because he did not rush her. They had supper as usual, talking about ordinary things, and then sat together on the porch watching the stars come out. When it was fully dark, Quincy took her hand. "We do not have to do anything tonight," he said quietly. "I know this is all new and probably overwhelming. We have the rest of our lives, Willa. There is no rush." But Willa shook her head. "I want to, I am just nervous." "So am I," Quincy admitted, which surprised her. "I have never been with a woman before, never wanted to be with anyone until you." This revelation made Willa feel better somehow, knowing that they would be discovering this together. She stood and held out her hand, and Quincy took it, following her into the house and to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. What happened next was tender and awkward and sweet, both of them fumbling their way through with patience and care. Quincy was gentle, constantly asking if she was all right, if anything hurt, if she wanted him to stop. Willa felt a brief sharp pain that faded quickly, replaced by a sense of closeness and connection that was more emotional than physical. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Willa's head on Quincy's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you," she said again, needing him to hear it. "I love you too," Quincy replied, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible," Willa said. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Willa's dreams were peaceful. Life as a married woman was different from life as an employee, but the changes were subtle and mostly welcome. Willa now shared Quincy's bed every night, and she found she loved the intimacy of it, not just the physical aspect, but the simple comfort of sleeping beside someone she loved. She loved waking up to find his arm around her waist, loved the sleepy kisses he gave her before heading out to start his day. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in late November and temperatures dropping sharply. The ranch work became harder, requiring both of them to spend long hours ensuring the animals were fed and sheltered. Willa learned to break ice on water troughs and to help Quincy move hay from the barn to the feeding areas. Her hands became rough and chapped, but she wore them proudly as badges of her new life. They talked more now, long conversations in the evening about everything and nothing. Quincy told her about his childhood in Colorado, about the harsh realities of growing up poor and orphaned. Willa shared her own memories, of her mother's illness and her father's desperate optimism, of the journey to New Mexico territory that had ultimately led to his death. "You think your father would have approved of me?" Quincy asked one night as they sat by the fire, Willa darning socks while he carved a new handle for a tool. "He would have loved you," Willa said without hesitation. "He always wanted me to find someone steady and reliable, someone who would take care of me. That is you, Quincy. That is exactly you. I hope I can live up to that. You already do, every single day." Christmas came, and they celebrated simply, with a small tree that Quincy cut from the forest and a few modest gifts. Willa gave Quincy a new shirt she had sewn, and he gave her a beautiful shawl made from the softest wool she had ever felt. They cooked a special dinner together and went to bed early, making love slowly and tenderly while the snow fell outside their window. In January, Willa realized her monthly courses were late. At first she thought it was just the stress of the hard winter, but when another week passed with no sign, she began to suspect. She waited another week to be sure, and then she told Quincy one evening over supper. "I think I might be carrying a child," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Quincy's fork clattered to his plate. "Truly, I think so. It is too early to be certain, but all the signs are there." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "That is wonderful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That is the most wonderful news." Willa felt relief flood through her. She had been afraid he might not be ready for children so soon, but clearly her fears were unfounded. "You are happy?" she asked. "I am more than happy, I am thrilled. A baby, Willa, our baby." They held each other for a long time, and Willa felt a deep sense of rightness. This was what she had been searching for all along, this sense of belonging, of building something meaningful with someone she loved. The pregnancy was confirmed by the doctor in Pinyon a few weeks later, and he predicted the baby would arrive in late August or early September. Willa was nervous but excited, and Quincy was almost comically attentive, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was feeling well, if she was doing too much. "You are going to drive me crazy," Willa said one day in March, laughing as Quincy tried to take the laundry basket from her for the third time. "I am with child, not dying. I can still do my work. I just want to make sure you are taking care of yourself." "I am taking care of myself by staying active and useful. Now go check on the cattle and let me do my laundry in peace." Spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and new growth. The ranch seemed to come alive after the long winter, and Willa spent hours in the garden, planting vegetables and herbs. Her belly was starting to show now, a small but definite swell, and she found herself constantly touching it, amazed by the life growing inside her. In June, they received an unexpected visitor. Willa was hanging laundry when she saw a familiar figure walking up the road from town. It took her a moment to recognize Martha, looking thin and tired but smiling. "Martha," Willa rushed over, embracing her friend carefully. "What are you doing here?" "I left the Silver Spur," Martha said. "Finally got the courage to walk away. I remembered you said I could come visit if I ever needed to, and I was hoping maybe you could help me find some work around here." "Of course," Willa said immediately. "Come inside, you must be exhausted." Over tea, Martha explained that Frank had gotten increasingly abusive and controlling, and she had finally reached her breaking point. She had no money and nowhere to go, and Willa was the only person she could think of who might help. "You can stay with us as long as you need to," Willa said, looking at Quincy for confirmation. "Absolutely," Quincy agreed. "We do not have much space, but you are welcome to it, and I am sure we can find work for you if you are willing." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, both of you. I do not know what I would have done." Martha ended up staying for 3 weeks, helping Willa with the household tasks and learning the basics of ranch work from Quincy. By the time she left, she had secured a position as a cook at one of the larger ranches 10 miles south, with a decent wage and her own cabin. She hugged Willa goodbye, promising to visit often, and headed off to her new life with a hopeful expression Willa had never seen on her before. "You did a good thing," Quincy said, watching Martha disappear down the road. "She would have done the same for me," Willa replied. "She was a good friend when I had no one else." The summer heat intensified, and Willa found the last months of her pregnancy increasingly uncomfortable. She was huge now, her belly seeming impossibly large, and simple tasks left her breathless and aching. Quincy took over more of the household work, insisting she rest as much as possible, and Willa was too tired to argue. In late August, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat seemed to press down like a physical weight, Willa felt the first pains. They started as a mild ache in her lower back and gradually intensified, until she was gripping the edge of the table and breathing hard through her teeth. "Quincy," she called, and he came running from the barn, taking one look at her face and going pale. The baby," Willa confirmed. Quincy wanted to ride for the doctor, but Willa knew there was not enough time. The pains were coming faster now, harder, and she could feel her body preparing for the work ahead. Instead, Quincy helped her to their bedroom, bringing water and clean linens, his hands shaking but steady. What followed were hours of intense pain and effort, Willa's body working to bring their child into the world while Quincy held her hand and whispered encouragement. He had helped birth calves and foals countless times, but this was different. This was his wife, his child, and Willa could see the fear and awe in his eyes. Finally, as the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold, Willa gave one final tremendous push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. Quincy caught the infant, tears streaming down his face, and wrapped the tiny body in a clean cloth. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "We have a son, Willa." He placed the baby on Willa's chest, and she looked down at the small, red, impossibly perfect face. The baby had dark hair like his father and was howling with impressive volume, his tiny fists waving in indignation. "Hello, little one," Willa whispered, exhausted and elated and overcome with love so fierce it hurt. "Hello, my beautiful boy." They named him James after Willa's father, and his middle name was Thomas, after Quincy's uncle who had left him the ranch. James Thomas Xander made his presence known immediately, demanding food and attention at all hours and keeping them both awake for weeks. But Willa had never been happier. She would walk the floor at 3 in the morning, rocking James and singing softly, and catch Quincy watching them with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. They were a family now, bound together by love and commitment and the tiny life they had created. The first year passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant work. James grew quickly, transforming from a helpless infant to a curious, active baby who crawled everywhere and got into everything. Willa and Quincy took turns caring for him while managing the ranch, and it was exhausting but also deeply fulfilling. On their second wedding anniversary, Quincy surprised Willa with a gift. He led her outside to find a new porch that he had been building in secret, larger than the old one with a swing seat big enough for two. "I thought we could sit here in the evenings," he said. "The three of us, watching the sunset like we used to before James came along." Willa kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Far from it," Quincy said, pulling her close. "But I try my best for you." They sat on the new swing that evening, James between them babbling happily, and Willa reflected on how far she had come. 3 years ago, she had been dancing in a saloon in Pinyon, desperate and hopeless, unable to see any future beyond the next night's work. Now she was sitting on her own porch, on her own ranch, with a husband who loved her and a son who was the light of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked, seeing the distant look in her eyes. "Just how lucky I am," Willa said. "How you saved me that night." "We saved each other," Quincy corrected gently. "I was barely living before you came along, just going through the motions. You made this place a home, Willa. You made me whole." James chose that moment to grab a fistful of his father's hair and yank, making Quincy yelp and Willa laugh. The tender moment dissolved into the chaos of managing an energetic toddler, but Willa did not mind. This was her life now, full of laughter and love and ordinary miracles. 2 years later, Willa gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose. She came into the world on a crisp October morning, smaller and quieter than James had been, with her mother's green eyes and her father's serious expression. James, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help and watch and touch her tiny fingers. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Quincy expanded the herd and bought more land, building their operation into something substantial and successful. Willa managed the household and the garden, which had grown large enough to provide most of their food and even some surplus to sell in town. They hired a ranch hand, a young man named Peter who reminded Willa of her father, optimistic and hardworking. In 1884, 6 years after that fateful night in the Silver Spur, Willa stood in her kitchen making bread while Catherine played on the floor and James helped Quincy outside with the horses. She paused in her kneading to look around, taking in the comfortable home they had built together. The walls were decorated with pictures James had drawn, Catherine's baby gown hanging to dry by the stove, Quincy's coat on its hook by the door. She heard footsteps and turned to see Quincy entering, James riding on his shoulders and both of them laughing about something. Quincy set James down, and the boy ran to his mother, hugging her legs and chattering about the new foal in the barn. Quincy came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "I love you," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "I love you too," Willa replied, leaning back against his solid strength. "Do you ever regret it?" Quincy asked. "Leaving town, coming here, choosing this life." Willa turned in his arms to look at him directly. "Not for one single second. This is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it. You gave me a home, Quincy. You gave me a family and a future and yourself. How could I ever regret that?" He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and James made exaggerated gagging noises that made them both laugh. That evening, after the children were in bed, Willa and Quincy sat on their porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. "I have been thinking," Quincy said, "about building an addition onto the house. Another bedroom or two, in case our family keeps growing." Willa smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach where new life was just beginning to make itself known. She had not told Quincy yet about the third baby she suspected was on the way, but apparently her body was giving her away. "You know," she said, "I suspected. You get a certain look. And you are happy about it, always," Quincy said, kissing her temple. "Every child we have is a gift, Willa. Every day with you is a gift." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Willa said, "I saw Martha in town last week. She is getting married to the foreman at the ranch where she works. She seems really happy." "That is good. Everyone deserves to be as happy as we are." "Not everyone gets that lucky," Willa pointed out. "No," Quincy agreed, "but we did. Against all odds, in spite of everything, we found each other." Willa thought about that night 6 years ago when Quincy had walked into the Silver Spur and offered her a chance at something different. She had been so scared, so desperate, so sure that nothing good could ever happen to her. And then this quiet cowboy had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself, had offered her not just a job but a future, had loved her when she felt unlovable. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" she asked. "When we were dancing, I said you did not seem like you belonged there. You said I belonged somewhere better, and you were right. I belonged here with you building this life. I just did not know it yet." Quincy pulled her closer, and they stayed like that until the cold drove them inside, where they checked on their sleeping children and then went to their own bed. They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other more with each passing day. The third baby, another boy they named Samuel, arrived in June of 1885. He was the easiest of the births, coming quickly on a warm afternoon while James and Catherine played in the garden under Peter's watchful eye. Quincy delivered him, as he had delivered all their children, and the pride and love in his face when he placed Samuel in Willa's arms was something she would remember forever. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Willa and Quincy's love deepened into something solid and unshakable. They had their challenges, of course. There were hard winters when the cattle struggled, summers when the heat destroyed the garden, illnesses that had them up all night with sick children. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense. In 1890, when Willa was 34 and Quincy was 39, James was 12, Catherine was 8, and Samuel was 5. They were no longer the struggling young couple trying to build something from nothing. They were an established family on a successful ranch, respected in the community and secure in their place in the world. One evening that summer, the whole family gathered on the porch that Quincy had expanded twice over the years to accommodate their growing brood. James was reading aloud from a dime novel, doing different voices for all the characters and making Catherine and Samuel giggle. Willa sat on the swing with Quincy, her head on his shoulder, feeling deeply content. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Quincy said quietly. "What is that?" "That night at the Silver Spur when I first saw you. I was so nervous walking in there. I had no idea what I was going to say or do, but then I saw you and everything just clicked into place. I knew you were the one I had been waiting for, even though I had not known I was waiting." "I thought you were strange," Willa admitted with a smile. "This quiet cowboy just watching me, not saying anything, but there was something about you that made me feel safe, even then. I am glad you took a chance on me. I am glad you took a chance on me. You saw past all the things that made me afraid to hope, past my work at the saloon and my lack of prospects. You saw me, Quincy, the real me, and you loved that person." "I still do," Quincy said, "more every day." They watched the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, while their children played and laughed around them. This was the life Willa had dreamed of during those long nights at the Silver Spur, even when she had not dared believe it could be real. This was the future that quiet cowboy had offered her, and she had been brave enough to take it. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. James grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning everything Quincy could teach him about managing cattle and land. Catherine became a talented seamstress and cook, with her mother's practical nature and her father's quiet strength. Samuel was the wild one, always getting into mischief but with a heart of gold and a gift for working with horses. In 1895, when Willa was 39, she and Quincy celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. They left the children with Peter, who had become like family over the years, and rode into Piñon for a rare night away from the ranch. They walked past the Silver Spur, which was still operating but looking more rundown than ever. Willa paused, looking at the dingy windows and the sound of raucous laughter spilling into the street. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had not come in that night?" Quincy asked. Willa considered it. "I think I would have eventually saved enough money to leave. Maybe made it to San Francisco or Denver, but I would have been alone, Quincy. I would have survived because that is what I do, but I would not have lived. Not really. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Quincy said, taking her hand. "I was just existing before you, Willa. You taught me what it meant to really be alive." They walked on, leaving the Silver Spur behind, and went to the hotel where they would spend the night. It was a luxury they rarely indulged in, but it felt right to mark this anniversary with something special. They had dinner in the hotel restaurant, laughing and talking like the young couple they had once been, and then retired to their room where they made love with the passion and tenderness that had only grown stronger over the years. The next morning they returned to the ranch to find everything in chaos. Catherine was crying, James was pacing angrily, and Samuel was sitting on the porch steps looking scared. Peter came out to meet them, his face grim. "What happened?" Quincy asked immediately. "Some men came by yesterday evening," Peter explained. "They were asking questions about the property, about whether you had clear title, about how long you had been here. When I told them to come back when you were home, they got aggressive. I ran them off, but they said they would be back." Willa felt a chill run down her spine. Who were they? Did not give names, but they had the look of railroad men or lawyers. Over the next few weeks, the mystery unraveled. A railroad company was planning a new line through the territory, and their proposed route ran directly through several ranches, including Quincy's. They were offering to buy the land, but the prices were insultingly low, barely enough to cover the cost of relocating. Quincy refused to sell, and so did most of the other ranchers in the path of the railroad. The railroad company responded by sending surveyors and lawyers, claiming they had the right to take the land through eminent domain. Tensions escalated quickly, with some of the ranchers threatening violence if anyone tried to force them off their property. Willa watched Quincy grow increasingly stressed and angry, and she worried about what would happen if the situation turned violent. They had built this life together, had raised their children here, had poured their blood and sweat and tears into this land. The thought of losing it was unbearable. The crisis came to a head in late September. The railroad company sent a delegation to meet with the affected ranchers, and Quincy attended with several of his neighbors. The meeting was tense and heated, with the railroad representatives insisting they had the legal right to take the land and the ranchers refusing to budge. Finally, after hours of arguments and threats, a compromise was reached. The railroad would alter its route slightly to avoid the most established ranches, including Quincy's, in exchange for right-of-way access across some of the less developed land. It was not a perfect solution, but it meant they could keep their home. When Quincy returned that evening and told Willa the news, she felt weak with relief. "It is over," she asked. "It is over," Quincy confirmed. "We get to stay." They held each other for a long time, and Willa realized how much this place meant to both of them. It was not just a ranch, not just a house. It was the physical manifestation of everything they had built together, every dream they had chased, every obstacle they had overcome. It was their home, and they would have fought to the death to keep it. Life settled back into its familiar rhythms after the railroad crisis passed. The children continued to grow and change, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James announced his intention to take over the ranch eventually, to carry on what his parents had built. Catherine fell in love with a young man from town, a carpenter's son with kind eyes and a good work ethic, and married him when she was 19. Samuel decided he wanted to study veterinary medicine, wanting to combine his love of animals with a desire to help people. Through it all, Willa and Quincy remained the steady center, their love the foundation upon which their family was built. They had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, had raised children and built a legacy, and they had done it all together. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Willa was 44 and Quincy was 49. They were grandparents now, Catherine having given them 2 beautiful grandchildren. James was engaged to be married, and Samuel was away studying, but he came home whenever he could. One evening in early spring, Willa and Quincy sat on their porch, the same spot where they had shared so many conversations over the years. The ranch spread out before them in the fading light, the cattle grazing peacefully, the mountains rising in the distance, everything green and alive with the promise of renewal. "You remember what I said to you that first night?" Quincy asked. "When I offered you this job, you said you needed a partner, someone to share the work and the profits." "I got so much more than that," Quincy said, taking her hand. "I got a wife, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. You made all of this possible, Willa. Every good thing in my life traces back to you." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "We made it possible together. I was drowning when you found me, Quincy. I had given up hope that anything good would ever happen to me. And then you walked into that saloon and offered me a future. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself." "I love you," Quincy said. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until my last breath." "I love you too," Willa replied, "more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, filling the vast New Mexico sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the cattle lowed softly in their sleep. The world was peaceful and perfect, and Willa felt a deep sense of gratitude for every twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the girl she had been at 22, dancing in the Silver Spur and dreaming of escape. She thought about how terrified she had been to take Quincy's offer, how close she had come to refusing out of fear. And she thought about everything that would have been lost if she had not been brave enough to take that leap of faith. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For offering me a way out. For loving me." "Thank you for accepting," Quincy replied. "For taking a chance on a quiet cowboy with nothing to offer but a small ranch and a lonely life." "It was never lonely after I came," Willa said. "It was home." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. There were more grandchildren, the expansion of the ranch, the loss of friends, and the making of new ones. Willa and Quincy grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the landscape around them, but their love remaining as strong and sure as ever. In 1910, when Willa was 54 and Quincy was 59, they celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. James was running most of the ranch now, with his father's guidance, and he was doing an excellent job. Catherine had 4 children and another on the way, and Samuel had established a successful veterinary practice in Santa Fe. Willa's health had been declining slowly over the past few years, her joints aching and her energy not what it once was. But she refused to slow down completely, still tending her garden and helping with the cooking and enjoying every moment with her family. One evening in late summer, as they sat together watching the sunset, Quincy said, "Do you think we have had a good life?" "The best life," Willa replied without hesitation. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" Willa thought about it, really considered the question. There had been hard times, certainly. There had been losses and disappointments and moments of profound difficulty. But all of it had led to this, to the life they had built, to the love they shared. "No," she said finally. "I would not change a single thing. Even the hard parts were worth it because they brought us here." Quincy squeezed her hand. "That is what I think too. We have been blessed, Willa, truly blessed." They sat together as the sky darkened, the familiar landscape of their ranch settling into shadow. This was their kingdom, built with hard work and dedication and love. These were their golden years, earned through a lifetime of partnership and commitment. More years passed, and the ranch continued to thrive under James's management. Willa and Quincy gradually stepped back from the daily work, becoming beloved elders who offered advice and wisdom, but let the younger generation take the lead. They watched their grandchildren grow and even welcomed great-grandchildren, each new baby a miracle, a continuation of the legacy they had built. In 1918, Quincy fell ill with pneumonia. He had always been so strong, so seemingly indestructible, that the sudden vulnerability was shocking. Willa nursed him through the fever and the terrible cough, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave even when their children begged her to rest. He recovered, but slowly, and he was never quite the same afterward. He tired more easily and moved more carefully, as if aware of his own mortality in a way he had not been before. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Willa remained fierce and unwavering. They were together 40 years, and then 45. In 1923, when Willa was 67 and Quincy was 72, they sat on their porch and marveled at how fast the time had passed. James was 51 now, with grown children of his own. Catherine was 47 and a grandmother herself. Samuel was 43 and still practicing veterinary medicine, though he was talking about retiring and returning to the ranch. "We did well," Quincy said one evening, his voice a little raspy but still warm. "Look at what we built, Willa. Look at our family, our home, our legacy." "We did better than well," Willa replied. "We did exactly what we set out to do. We built a life worth living." "I would do it all again," Quincy said. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge, I would do it all again just to end up here with you." "Me too," Willa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Always." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch was alive around them, with grandchildren playing and cattle lowing and the familiar sounds of home filling the air. This was what it all meant. This was the point of everything they had worked for. Not just survival, but joy. Not just existence, but love. Quincy passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925, just shy of his 74th birthday. Willa woke one morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was immense and overwhelming, but it was tempered by gratitude for the 47 years they had shared, for the life they had built together, for the love that had sustained them through everything. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them a testament to what she and Quincy had created. She told them stories about the Silver Spur and the night a quiet cowboy had walked in and changed her life. She told them about the early days on the ranch, about learning to be partners and then lovers and then parents. She told them about all the struggles and triumphs, and she made sure they understood how precious and hard won their legacy was. Willa passed away in the summer of 1930 at the age of 74, in the same house where she had lived with Quincy for so many years. Her last words were his name, spoken with love and longing, and when she closed her eyes for the final time, she was smiling. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with headstones that read simply Quincy Xander, 1851–1925, beloved husband and father, and Willa Xander, 1856–1930, beloved wife and mother. But their real memorial was the ranch itself, still thriving, still home to their descendants, still a testament to what two people could build when they took a chance on each other. The story of the Dancehall girl who dreamed of leaving town and the quiet cowboy who offered her his ranch became family legend, passed down through generations. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a story about courage and partnership, and the power of seeing someone for who they truly are. It was about two people who found each other against all odds and built something lasting and beautiful. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the ranch as the decades passed, still worked the land, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset over the New Mexico mountains. And when they did, they sometimes felt the presence of their ancestors, Quincy and Willa, watching over them with love and pride. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a symbol of what their love had created. Every fence post, every building, every acre of grazing land was a reminder of the quiet cowboy and the Dancehall girl who had taken a chance on each other and created something extraordinary. And in the town of Piñon, the Silver Spur Saloon eventually closed, the building abandoned and eventually torn down. But the ranch remained, a living testament to the fact that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. That love can bloom in the most unexpected places. That two people who seem to have nothing in common can build a life together that spans decades and touches generations. Quincy and Willa's love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was quieter than that, built on respect and partnership and daily acts of kindness. But it was no less powerful for its simplicity. In fact, that was what made it remarkable. Two ordinary people who loved each other extraordinarily, who built a home and raised a family and created a legacy that would last long after they were gone. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and separation. But in another sense, it never ended at all. It lived on in their descendants, in the ranch that still bore their mark, in the love that had been the foundation of everything they built. They had started with almost nothing, just a lonely cowboy and a desperate dancehall girl, and they had created something that would endure for generations. That was the real miracle of their story. Not that they found each other, though that was remarkable enough, but that they took that chance meeting and turned it into something lasting, something meaningful, something that would touch lives for 100 years and beyond. They proved that love, real love, the kind built on respect and partnership and daily commitment, can overcome any obstacle and create miracles that last forever. And so the ranch remained, and the family grew, and the story was told and retold, becoming more beautiful with each telling. The dancehall girl who dreamed of leaving town had found something better than escape. She had found home, and the quiet cowboy who offered her his ranch had found something more valuable than help. He had found love. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a dynasty, not just a house but a home, not just a life but a legacy. And that was the happiest ending anyone could hope for.